So, starting to look at the Alice project stuff. I have been having trouble doing drawings for it, so I thought I would come into the studio and mess about with some fabric. And I brought in Olivia, my doll that I was working off, or planning on working off, to see if that would also help, because obviously the proportions are very different from using the half scale mannequins to doll size. There are big differences in size. Anyway, so I thought maybe I should start with making a petticoat, because with the designs for, at the very least the designs for Alice that I've got, they're going to be quite structured, and I was looking at the photos of my China dolls at home, and the skirts are quite voluminous, even though on a doll obviously there isn't as much, there aren't as many layers for the petticoats. So to recreate that, I'm going to have to make a petticoat of some kind, and probably also have a hoop in there as well. I've got some net that's just from the studio, and I remembered why I hate making petticoats, because there's a lot of layers, and I accidentally started from the top down, and you should always start from the bottom up because of how everything pleats. And I was going to make several layers, but I've made like one layer and kind of given up, but it'll have enough to it to show me what kind of effect it's going to have. So I put it on Olivia, and it's about the right length for her, but obviously there's not the same bell shape that I'm going for. The illustration that I've done, or the drawing I've done, I'm mostly working off at the minute. The waistline is very, very high, so the petticoats, the layers need to start above the waist, basically. So just under the bust. Looking at it now and sort of thinking about what I know about my model's body shape and things he's worn in the past, I'm likely going to have to make an underdress. So the layers won't be anchored at the waist, they'll be anchored from like just below the bust, and they'll hang off the shoulders rather than trying to hang on to nothing, because obviously it's going to want to slide down, and that's going to cause problems. So structurally that's a point I should make. I was also I tried the petticoat the half petticoat I made on one of the half scale mannequins, and at the waist it's entirely the wrong silhouette. I tried pinning it up under the bust, and it's slightly better. It has more of like a sort of not rectangular shape, but it's still not quite enough. So I might actually have to start the layers of net at the bust, which could work quite well if my model isn't going to be wearing a bra, because I want this sort of like childlike, not boxy, but it's not particularly curvy. So that is something I might have to keep in mind. Yeah, I also made a just sort of like a very, very, very basic overskirt, just like a long rectangular fabric with a ribbon through to tie it wherever I need to tie it, and put it over the petticoat on the half scale. And I think it might just also be just the amount of fabric I've put into it. There is a lot of extra fabric, so much so that the bust actually gets lost. So if I put it under the it's sort of covered up. It just makes like if there was another piece of fabric over the top going from the shoulders downwards, it would just sort of make a straight line, which is kind of what I'm going for. but the petticoats themselves aren't voluminous enough. They need to have more to them. So just as an experiment, it was an interesting thing to do. I think I'll have to be very conscious about the amount of extra fabric at that sort of bust point on the actual dress, because although I want it to look blocky, I don't want it to look unflattering on my model, and my model is already quite large, and a lot of extra fabric is just going to make him look bad. So that is something I would need to consider. I think the best thing I could do is if I make the outer layer of the dress not necessarily quite thin, but keep it not add too much, not have too heavy a fabric for the outer layer of the dress. Have the structure come in at the pleats around the bottom to give the effect of a stiff fabric, and the petticoats underneath to help give the volume that I need, and to hold the structure. If I am going with the design that I sketched, the one with the sort of like mushroom sleeves and the crochet bow, the sleeves could attach to a blouse that go under the apron and the bow and the skirt and everything, because I think how I'm planning on doing the sleeves, the sort of mushroomy sleeves, is having layers of net underneath to sort of make them puff out in the weird triangular way that they do, which are going to be obviously quite structured and potentially quite heavy, and that's obviously if I'm only having the thin layer of fabric for the outer skirt fabric and the bodice. That's going to again cause problems potentially, and I don't want any extra weight where it doesn't need to be. I have just found a very nice velvet upholstery fabric in the stores, which might be fun to play with, but I'll have to see how much I will need, because actually no, that is a really good fabric, because it's still quite thick and it will bunch up quite quickly. But if I am careful about how I do the pleats for the skirt at the waist, or I try and make the skirt more shaped as opposed to just like a rectangle that's gathered in, that could potentially be quite a nice fabric, and then it would contrast nicely with a white cotton, and it just has nice like folds to it which stand out quite nicely. So I might actually ask to put that aside. In terms of I also had a look at some of the because the first years are currently doing the Victorian Secrets underpinnings module, so all the half scale mannequins have like panniers and hoop skirts and bustles and things on them at the minute. There was one, I don't know what it's called, it's the sort of flat Elizabethan one. I did have a quick look at that, because if I am also considering the Red Queen, that might be a fun thing to try for the sort of open skirt thing that I was considering. I don't know if I can be bothered to make one, to be honest, and I don't know if it would give the right shape proportion wise to both the sort of like doll proportions and my model. If I wanted to test it, I would have to make a slightly smaller version for Olivia and then make the dress around it, which I'm not certain I have time for. I think it's probably a worthwhile thing to do, just to check everything's how I want it to be, but it's going to be a lot of work. So what I might actually do, I was trying to avoid it because of the time, but I think it would be worth padding out my half scale mannequin to my model's measurements more or less, so then I can have a better idea of proportions at the half scale before I start trying to scale things up, because there's quite a high chance that I will work things out on the like size 12 half scale mannequin and it'll look fine and perfect and how I want it to be, and then as soon as I try and make it like larger for my model, the proportions are going to be weird. So I want to make absolutely sure I know what I'm doing before I start scaling up. So I think I will do that. I will inquire about the velvet. I will maybe start padding out the half scale today, and then I will keep drawing to see if I can refine my illustrations a bit. I do really like the looking at the photos I took of my dolls and some of my research I've done, I can probably combine several elements from different dolls to have a similar effect, but I'm not just outright copying the design of the dress that the doll already has, which I want to avoid. So I will get on with that. And I did buy some remnants of like curtain lace because I wanted to see about maybe like fussy cutting some of the edges to make some like large lace, because obviously I quite like the crochet idea, but it's a lot of work and I don't know if it's going to be worth the time, because if I spend all that time obviously making a big crochet bow and then decide that it doesn't look right or the scale is off, then that's time I've wasted, so I don't want to be doing that if I can help it. There's also the Bennett, both could be dyed, but the curtain lace won't have to be steamed or shrunk in any way. If I use the piping cord, then because it's cotton, I'm going to have to shrink that before I use it, and I'm not entirely sure how I go about shrinking such a large quantity of cotton cord before I start crocheting, which is going to be another problem. I'd probably have to bundle it up and put it in the boil washer or something.